Fear is one of the most misunderstood emotions we experience as human beings. We often equate it with failure, with fragility, or even shame. From a young age, we're taught to be brave, to be bold, to be unshakable, but not necessarily how to understand fear, not how to work with it, and certainly not how to listen to it. The moment fear shows up, we instinctively try to silence it. We label it as weakness, as hesitation, as something we must overcome or hide before we can be taken seriously. But here's what we're not told. Fear in many cases is not a barrier, it's a messenger. It arrives not to sabotage us, but to guide us. It's not proof that we're incapable. Often, it's evidence that we're standing at the edge of something meaningful. When fear whispers, "What if I fail?" it's not just delivering doubt, it's pointing to something that matters deeply to us. We don't fear things we don't care about. We don't tremble over things that hold no value. Think about that. The fear you feel before stepping onto a stage, starting a business, entering a new relationship, or speaking your truth, it comes because your heart is invested. Fear shows up when stakes are high, when the outcome matters, when a piece of your identity is tied to the risk. And yet, we've learned to treat this emotional signal like an enemy. We armor up against it, suppress it, distract ourselves from it. We tell ourselves stories that if we were truly strong, we wouldn't feel this way at all. But in doing so, we miss the opportunity to ask one of the most important questions. What is my fear trying to tell me? There's a kind of wisdom in fear that we're not trained to access. It often exists beneath the surface, quiet, persistent, and personal. Fear may be telling you that you're stepping outside of your comfort zone and that you're no longer protected by the familiar. It may be telling you that something precious to you, your values, your voice, your vision, is on the line. And while it's easy to resent this feeling, it's actually evidence that you're alive and engaged with your life. Fear isn't just a response to danger, it's a response to significance, to purpose. When we stop viewing it as an indicator of weakness and start viewing it as a message to decode, something changes inside us. We become less reactive. We start to observe instead of panic, and in that pause we find choice. And one of the most damaging beliefs we absorb is that only the fearless succeed, that those who rise to the top of industries, of movements, of histories, were somehow born without the weight of doubt or dread. But ask anyone who has ever done something worthwhile, and they'll tell you the truth. They were afraid, they were terrified, and still they acted, not because they didn't feel fear, but because they learned to interpret it differently. They stopped waiting to feel brave before moving forward. Instead, they moved forward because the message of fear was loud enough to confirm, "This matters to me, this moment, this dream, this voice, it's worth the discomfort." When fear becomes your signal instead of your stop sign, it shifts your entire orientation toward life. And there's another layer to this. Fear also protects us. It evolved to keep us safe, to alert us to harm, to anchor us to caution in a world that can sometimes be unpredictable and overwhelming. But in today's world, that system often misfires. The same fear response that helped us survive real danger is now triggered by perceived social rejection, uncertainty, or change. Your body might interpret stepping into a new leadership role or publishing your first piece of writing as a life-threatening event. Your heart races, your palms sweat, your breath shortens. But this is not weakness. This is your nervous system doing its job. And instead of rejecting that process, what if we thanked it? What if we said, "I see you, I know you're trying to keep me safe, but I'm safe enough to do this anyway." That kind of dialogue with fear, gentle, grounded, respectful, is not often modeled for us, but it's available, and it's powerful. We are not machines. We are layered, emotional, constantly evolving beings, and the presence of fear does not disqualify you from success. It does not mean you are inadequate or incapable. If anything, It means you're standing in front of something that could stretch you, shape you, or transform you. That's not a weakness, that's a message. And once we understand that, we start living with a different kind of courage. Not loud, not reckless, but rooted. The kind that listens first. The kind that moves forward not despite fear but in conversation with it. Fear, on the surface, often disguises itself in simple reactions: hesitation, anxiety, avoidance, withdrawal. These reactions can feel so overwhelming, so immediate, that we rarely pause to explore what lies beneath them. We stop at the symptom and forget to ask what's really causing it. But if we want to grow, if we truly want to evolve through our fears rather than be ruled by them, we have to be willing to dig deeper. We have to ask not just what we are feeling, but why. Why does our chest tighten when we think about speaking in public? Why do our hands tremble when we're about to send that email, pitch that idea, share our truth? On the surface, it looks like fear of failure, but often it runs much deeper. Fear of being judged, misunderstood, rejected, or seen as not enough. These root fears are subtle, but they're powerful. They are usually formed over time, often shaped by our earliest experiences and relationships. If you grew up feeling that your voice wasn't heard or that your ideas were dismissed, fear will rise the moment you consider expressing yourself. Not because you're not capable, but because somewhere deep inside, a younger version of you remembers the pain of not being received. If you've ever been humiliated for trying and failing, fear might now echo in the form of perfectionism, this constant, exhausting need to be flawless before even beginning. So much of our fear isn't about the present moment. It's about old wounds resurfacing in new situations, and unless we're willing to trace the thread back to its origin, we'll keep treating the reaction instead of healing the root. We live in a world that moves fast, a world that often rewards performance over presence. In such a world, we're conditioned to push through fear without questioning it. We slap motivation over anxiety, hoping to silence the discomfort. But just like a plant can't thrive if its roots are diseased, we cannot move forward in a healthy way if the foundation of our fear is misunderstood. To identify the root, we need to practice awareness, not judgment, not analysis, just awareness. The next time you feel fear arise, instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this?" try asking, "Where is this coming from? What am I really afraid will happen?" Sometimes the answer surprises us. Sometimes we discover that we're not afraid of failing. We're afraid of being seen trying and not being instantly excellent, or that we're not afraid of being alone, but of being forgotten, or that success itself feels threatening because we're scared we won't know how to handle it. This kind of emotional investigation takes courage. It requires slowing down in a world that tells you to speed up. It asks you to face the discomfort directly, to sit with it without rushing to fix it. But this is where transformation begins. When you identify the root, you take your power back. You start to understand your reactions instead of being controlled by them. You begin to separate past pain from present opportunity. You gain clarity, and from clarity, you gain choice. Because once you know that the fear you're feeling is not really about this moment, but about a story you've been carrying, you can decide whether that story still deserves a place in your life. It's also important to note that different fears may have different roots. The fear of public speaking may be rooted in a moment you were mocked for your voice. The fear of starting over may come from a time when you had no support and had to do everything alone. Our nervous system remembers these experiences even when our conscious mind does not. That's why fear can feel irrational. It's not based on what's happening now. It's based on what happened before and hasn't been processed. The body carries it. The breath shortens. The muscles tense. These are all messages from the nervous system, not just reactions, but records. And every time we ignore them, we miss the chance to resolve them. Healing fear at the root doesn't mean you'll never feel it again. It means when it does arise, you'll understand it more clearly. You'll know how to speak to yourself more kindly. You'll know how to create space between the trigger and the truth. You'll begin to respond instead of react. You'll realize that fear isn't a wall, it's a mirror. And what it reflects back to you is something essential: your vulnerability, your past, your longing for safety, your hunger for significance. To face your fear isn't to conquer it like a battle, it's to understand it like a language. And the more fluent you become, the more you start to see fear not as a stop signal, but as a point of entry into deeper awareness. Success is one of the most overused and underexamined words in our lives. From the moment we are old enough to understand language, we are surrounded by a very specific and narrow image of what success should look like. It's loud, it's shiny, it's measurable. It often looks like numbers, grades, salaries, followers, awards, and even when those numbers increase, the definition keeps shifting further away. It becomes a moving target that feeds on comparison and external validation. We chase titles because we think they'll give us value. We chase perfection because we think it will finally quiet the voice that says we're not enough. But somewhere along the way, we stop asking whether this definition of success actually belongs to us, or whether we've simply inherited it. We stop checking in with ourselves. We stop questioning the cost of that pursuit. Redefining success requires a moment of radical honesty. It's not a flashy process. It's quiet. It's deeply personal. And often it starts with burnout, with exhaustion, with that ache in your chest that says, I'm doing everything I was told would make me happy and I still feel empty. That's not failure, that's awakening. It's your inner self asking for alignment. Because true success, real, lasting, soul-deep success, cannot be measured in numbers alone. It must be rooted in your values, your truth, your own rhythm of becoming. If success has been making you feel smaller instead of stronger, disconnected instead of fulfilled, then maybe it's time to ask, whose definition are you living by? There is nothing wrong with ambition. There is nothing wrong with achievement. But when ambition becomes a mask you wear to earn approval, or when achievement becomes the only way you measure your worth, it stops being empowering and starts being a prison. So many people live in fear, not because they haven't succeeded, but because they are afraid of stepping away from a version of success that no longer serves them. They've built a life on someone else's blueprint, one designed to impress, to please, to prove, and now they feel like strangers in their own story. And the irony is, the more they achieve within that framework, the more stuck they feel, because the success they've reached isn't feeding them, it's draining them. To redefine success, you have to slow down. You have to turn inward. You have to ask the questions most people avoid. What do I actually want? What makes me feel alive, even if no one's watching? What does fulfillment look like when no one is there to applaud me? The answers won't always be easy. They might surprise you. You might discover that what you really want is peace, not power. That you crave depth, not attention. That your idea of success isn't about being admired, but about being connected to your work, to your purpose, to your people, to yourself. And that shift, while invisible to others, can completely transform your life. It's important to understand that redefining success doesn't mean aiming lower. It doesn't mean giving up on excellence or passion. It means creating a life that feels like yours, not a performance for someone else's applause. It means allowing yourself the space to fail, to change your mind, to grow in directions that weren't part of the original plan. It means embracing the parts of you that don't fit into a neat, marketable narrative, and realizing that those parts are often where your deepest strength resides. You stop needing permission to be who you are. You stop needing validation to do what you love. You begin to trust that what matters most cannot always be seen, and that doesn't make it less valuable. It makes it more sacred. Success, on your terms, might look quiet. It might look like building something slowly and intentionally instead of rushing toward recognition. It might look like prioritizing rest, or saying no, or starting over. It might mean being deeply present in your relationships, even if it means stepping back from the spotlight. It might mean pursuing something that no one else understands but feels entirely right to you. That is not lesser, that is not lazy, that is liberation. Because when you redefine success, you stop performing for the world and start living in alignment with your own soul. And that alignment, that's where clarity lives, that's where energy returns, that's where fear begins to loosen its grip. Not because everything becomes easy, but because what you're working toward finally feels worth it. Redefining success is not a one-time decision. It's a continual practice of listening, adjusting, and honoring your evolving self, because who you are at 20 may not be who you are at 40, and what once felt like success may begin to feel like constraint. That's not a crisis. That's growth. You are allowed to outgrow your old goals. You are allowed to want something different. You are allowed to walk away from things that no longer align, even if the world praises you for staying. Vulnerability is a word that makes many people uncomfortable. It's a concept that's often misunderstood, misrepresented, or dismissed as soft, weak, or even dangerous. We're taught, often from childhood, that strength means control, that composure means power, that to be taken seriously, to be respected, to be safe, we must never let them see us sweat, break, cry, hesitate, or fall apart. We build walls. We perfect our masks. We learn how to present ourselves as polished, collected, and in command, even when we are struggling, even when we are breaking. And in that process, something essential is lost, something deeply human. Because vulnerability isn't the opposite of strength, it's the essence of it. To be vulnerable is not to be weak. It is to be honest. It is to stand in your truth without armoring yourself against judgment. It is to say, this is who I am, this is how I feel, this is what I need, and to do so knowing full well that people may misunderstand, dismiss, or even reject you. That kind of courage, the willingness to show up as you are without guarantees of acceptance, is rare, and it's revolutionary. Because in a world that trains us to hide our pain, numb our fears, and pretend we have it all together, vulnerability becomes an act of quiet rebellion. It is not a lack of strength. It is strength in motion. It is not surrender. It is bravery at its most honest. Vulnerability doesn't just show up in big, dramatic moments. It lives in the everyday choices we make. It's the moment you admit you don't have all the answers. It's the moment you reach out for help, even though you were raised to believe you should do it all alone. It's the moment you express your feelings instead of burying them. It's the moment you apologize with sincerity, or forgive without conditions, or tell someone you love them without knowing if they'll say it back. These acts may look small from the outside, but inside they're seismic. They require a level of self-awareness, self-trust, and emotional intelligence that many people spend a lifetime avoiding. To be vulnerable is to risk being seen, and for some of us, that is the scariest thing we can imagine. But here's the truth. You cannot connect without vulnerability. You cannot love, lead, create, grow, or heal without it. Real relationships, whether romantic, familial, professional, or personal, are built on shared truth. And you can't share truth if you're always hiding. You can't build trust if you're only ever performing. Vulnerability is the bridge that allows others to meet you where you actually are, not where you pretend to be. And yes, it's risky. People might let you down. They might not hold your truth with the care it deserves. But the alternative is isolation. The alternative is building a life that looks strong from the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. The workplace, the stage, the classroom, the family dinner table, these are all spaces that desperately need more vulnerability, not less. Because when we show our humanness, we give others permission to do the same. When leaders admit they are uncertain but still committed, they create space for innovation. When creators share the messy process behind the polished product, they deepen their impact. When friends, partners, and siblings stop trying to be perfect and start being present, the whole texture of the relationship shifts. There's more room for softness, more room for laughter, more room for the kind of connection that heals instead of harms. Vulnerability isn't just good for the soul, it's good for the system. And perhaps most importantly, vulnerability with yourself is the gateway to growth. You cannot change what you won't name. You cannot heal what you pretend doesn't hurt. So many people spend years locked in patterns that no longer serve them, not because they're incapable of change, but because they're afraid to admit what's really going on beneath the surface. It's easier to say, "I'm fine," than to say, "I'm scared," or "I'm sad," or "I'm struggling." But there is no strength in denial. There is only stagnation. Strength begins the moment you decide to be honest with yourself about what you feel, what you want, and what you're carrying. And that honesty, that's what moves you forward. So much of our culture rewards a very narrow version of strength, one that looks like certainty, independence, and stoicism. But real strength is far more complex. Real strength is being open in a world that asks you to close. Real strength is softening your heart when you've been hurt. Real strength is staying when it would be easier to run, or walking away when staying means abandoning yourself. Real strength is letting people see the parts of you that are still in progress. And real strength, perhaps more than anything else, is the refusal to abandon your truth, even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or unpopular. We spend so much of our lives chasing approval. Sometimes we're conscious of it, and sometimes it's so ingrained in us that we don't even recognize it for what it is. It starts early, with the praise we get for being polite, for doing well, for staying quiet when we're upset. With the way smiles and gold stars become currency for being good, being agreeable, being what others need us to be. And so, slowly, without meaning to, we begin to build our identity around the reactions of others. We learn to read a room before we read ourselves. We measure our worth in applause, acceptance, and affirmation. But the danger of living this way is that we never actually feel safe unless someone outside of us tells us we are. The problem with external approval is not that it feels good. It does, and it's completely human to want to be seen, valued, and loved. The problem is when we start relying on it to feel secure, when our sense of value is so entangled with being liked, admired, or validated that any criticism, silence, or disapproval feels like a personal collapse. When that happens, our emotional safety becomes transactional. We start shape-shifting to avoid discomfort. We silence ourselves to avoid confrontation. We shrink our needs, opinions, and boundaries just to maintain the illusion of harmony. But inner peace can never grow in a space where your truth is constantly edited for someone else's comfort. And approval that requires self-abandonment isn't safety, it's a cage. Building inner safety is a radically different path. It's quieter, slower, and often lonelier at first. It asks you to stop looking outward and begin looking inward. It means creating a space within yourself where your feelings are valid, where your needs are listened to, and where your mistakes do not erase your worth. It means becoming someone you can rely on, even when no one else is clapping, even when no one else understands what you're doing or why. Inner safety is not built overnight. It's built choice by choice, moment by moment, in the way you respond to yourself. When you mess up, do you attack yourself or do you offer compassion? When you're scared, do you push yourself to get over it or do you meet yourself with curiosity? When you feel uncertain, do you run for external advice or do you sit with your own intuition first? These small choices form the foundation of self-trust, and self-trust is where real safety lives. There's a reason so many of us struggle with this. Our culture often conditions us to believe that love is earned, not innate, that we have to perform to be worthy, that rest, softness, slowness, and emotional needs are signs of weakness, not wisdom. So when we try to build inner safety, we often bump up against internalized beliefs that tell us we're being selfish, lazy, or dramatic. But questioning those beliefs is part of the process. We must begin to separate what we were taught from what is actually true. Because the truth is, you do not need to be perfect to be worthy. You do not need to be impressive to be lovable. You do not need to be understood by everyone to be safe with yourself. These truths might sound simple, but living them takes immense strength. Inner safety means being able to sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for distraction or reassurance. It means being willing to disappoint others in order to stay loyal to yourself. It means recognizing when your people-pleasing is really just self-protection dressed up as kindness. It means unlearning the instinct to fix, prove, and explain, and learning instead to be rooted in your own clarity. You might lose some approval in the process. You might lose some relationships built on performance or convenience, but what you gain is priceless: freedom, authenticity, peace. You stop needing everyone to agree with you because you've agreed to stand by yourself. This shift changes everything. It changes how you show up in conversations, no longer bending to avoid conflict, but willing to stay grounded in truth. It changes how you approach goals, not from a place of, look what I can do, but from a place of, this is meaningful to me. It changes how you process failure, seeing it not as a verdict, but as part of growth. It changes your relationships, drawing in people who respect your truth instead of only valuing your usefulness. And perhaps most beautifully, it changes your relationship with fear. Because when you are safe with yourself, fear loses its power to define your choices. You no longer need to be fearless. You just need to be faithful to your own inner anchor. Approval will come and go. It is never guaranteed. It is subject to bias, misunderstanding, mood, and projection. But your ability to self-soothe, to self-validate, and to remain whole in the face of doubt, that is a kind of power that cannot be taken from you. Inner safety is the place you return to when the world feels shaky. It's the steady ground beneath your feet when you're walking through uncertainty. It's the quiet knowing that your worth was never up for debate. Not when you win, not when you lose, not when you shine, and not when you fall completely apart. Anxiety can feel like being trapped in a room with no doors, only mirrors. Everywhere you turn, you're staring at a reflection of your fears, your doubts, your overthinking. It's a loop, a spiral, a hum beneath the surface that grows louder when left unattended. Sometimes it's sharp and sudden, and sometimes it's quiet and chronic, hiding beneath busyness and performance. But regardless of how it shows up, anxiety is often rooted in the mind's desire to predict, control, and protect. We try to think our way out of discomfort. We try to solve future problems before they arrive. We try to manage every possible outcome so we never have to feel unprepared or vulnerable. And in that effort to control everything, we begin to do nothing except think and worry and overanalyze until even the smallest task feels monumental. One of the most frustrating things about anxiety is that it mimics productivity. It can trick you into believing you're doing something useful, that all the planning and thinking and double-checking are helping. But anxiety rarely produces action. It often delays it. It tells you you're not ready, that you need to know more, be more, wait longer. It creates a false sense of safety through hesitation, and before you know it, you've spent hours or days or months stuck in mental rehearsal, trying to perfect an outcome that doesn't yet exist, while life quietly passes you by. The longer you stay in that space, the more powerful the fear becomes. You begin to associate stillness with safety, when in reality, stillness, when driven by fear, only deepens the dread. This is where action becomes essential, not as a cure-all, not as a way to bypass emotion, but as a lifeline. Action interrupts anxiety. It doesn't erase it, but it changes its rhythm. It disrupts the mental spiral and gives the body something to anchor to. It reminds you that while your thoughts may feel overwhelming, they do not have to dictate your behavior. Taking even the smallest step, a phone call, an email, writing down a plan, moving your body, cleaning your space, can shift the energy from paralysis to motion. It gives your nervous system a new signal. We're not trapped, we're moving. We're not stuck, we're choosing. And that message is powerful. It teaches your mind that fear doesn't have to decide for you. The most important part of this is that the action doesn't have to be big. In fact, it shouldn't be. When anxiety is high, the goal is not to tackle the mountain. It's to take one single, doable step. You don't need to have the whole path figured out. You just need to show your body that you are capable of moving forward. The brain learns through experience, not logic. So telling yourself, "I'm okay," may not work if your nervous system is in a state of high alert. But doing something, breathing deeply, standing up, writing one sentence, washing a dish, gives your system real evidence that the threat is not as immediate or all-consuming as it feels. Action grounds you in the present moment, and the present moment is where fear has the least power. Letting action interrupt anxiety also requires a shift in mindset. You have to be willing to act before you feel fully ready. You have to be willing to risk imperfection, to take steps that might be messy or incomplete or misunderstood. That is where many people get stuck. They wait for clarity before they act, not realizing that clarity often comes from action. You move, and then you learn. You try, and then you adjust. You speak, and then you refine. Waiting for the perfect plan, the perfect moment, or the perfect version of yourself is another form of avoidance dressed up as preparation. At some point, the only way to know what will happen is to do the thing you're afraid of doing and let the doing teach you. There's a quiet kind of strength in showing up when your mind is screaming with doubt, in choosing to act while still carrying fear, in deciding that discomfort will not define your direction. Anxiety might still be present, the thoughts may still swirl, the worst-case scenarios may still whisper, but you move anyway. You write the sentence, you make the call, you show up to the meeting, you open your mouth even though your voice shakes, and in doing so, you reclaim a little more of your power, not because you fought anxiety and won, but because you lived alongside it and didn't let it win. The truth is, courage often looks like that, not loud or dramatic, but subtle and steady. It's not the absence of fear, it's movement in the presence of it. And the more you practice taking action while anxious, the more resilient you become. You stop fearing fear itself. You begin to trust that you can feel uncomfortable and still function, still create, still live. You begin to realize that action isn't just something you do. It's a way of being in the world, a way of telling your body, your mind, and your spirit, we are not stuck, we are still moving.